Hello and welcome to Lesson 6. We're entering the second half of the quarter, so we're going to start a new unit. Thank you for turning in the final drafts of your first major paper. I look forward to reading those. I really do. I love reading, hearing, seeing what you have to say, and being able to give you feedback, engage in a dialogue with you about your writing. I'm really looking forward to that. But I teach quite a few classes, and they all have papers due at the same time. So it's going to take me a little while, probably about 2 weeks, to get you that feedback. I know you're anxious for it, and I'm sorry it can't be sooner. That's just the way it is with my schedule. So in the meantime, while you're waiting for me to get back to you with that feedback, you can start thinking about our next project. Just as we spent the first 5 weeks of the quarter on the critical unit, we're going to spend the second half of the quarter, these final 5 weeks, on one unit. It'll be a little bit different. The key difference is I'm going to introduce you to the final paper that you'll turn in at the end of the quarter right now. And that's what we're going to spend this lecture going over. I really want to spend these slides giving you an in-depth, robust understanding of what the final paper will be like, what my expectations are for that. And that's different from the critical reading unit. In the first unit, I scaffolded more. We did some things earlier on, like the reading guide and other similar things to kind of practice synthesis and build up to the writing of the actual paper. You didn't need as much time to write that paper because I gave you the research. I said pick 3 articles from the critical reading unit for your research. And I also gave you the topic, technology's influence on society. This project is different because you get to choose your topic and you get to do your own research. So you need time to figure those things out. That's part of the writing process, part of the brainstorming process. And so I want to introduce you to the assignment, give you an in-depth understanding of it, like I said in this very first lecture for the new unit, so that you really know what to look for as you start to do your research and choose a topic over the next few weeks. Hopefully you can actually choose a topic by the end of this week's lesson, by the end of this week, so that you can start researching it next week. Next week's lesson will be about doing research, whereas this lesson is focused on telling you what the assignment is and giving you some examples so you can pick out your own topic similar to the examples I show you, but one that you're interested in. So the assignment is a web article. We'll talk about what a web article is in a minute. And your goal, your focus, what you're doing is a researched analysis of pop culture. So a web article is an article that's published online. Web articles can be very academic and professional with research and whatnot. And that's the kind you'll be writing since this is a college class. And your focus will be pop culture. So you get to pick a text you're really interested in. That's about something you care about. And so I'm going to spend the next few slides going over in detail what exactly I'm asking you to do and how I want you to do that. So a lot of this language comes directly from the assignment prompt, which is on Canvas, and it's under the module for this week, so you can find that assignment prompt. On all of my assignment sheets, all my prompts, I use a transparent teaching format, which means I talk about the purpose or the reason why we do an assignment. First, I start with the task, what I'm asking you to do, and then I go into the purpose. And so I'm going to go through those things on these slides and, like I said, give you some direct language from the prompt here. So in the very first sentence, I have one sentence here. I try to be succinct, telling you exactly what I'm expecting. Your job is to investigate and produce a written analysis of an artifact. So this can be anything: a TV show, a song, a meme, a movie, a video game, a social media site, a poster, so on and so forth. So your job is to investigate and produce a written analysis of an artifact that you believe exemplifies an important concept, phenomenon, or trend in our current culture. It's a lot of words, so I'm going to try to break this down for you. It might be a good idea to pause the lecture here, reread this on your own, and try to say it in your own words. But here's how I break it down for you. There's really 2 things going on here. So on one level, you're analyzing a specific cultural artifact. Specific as in you've chosen a specific text, a movie, a song, a TV show, a meme, a video game, etc. A specific thing you're looking at and you're analyzing that. So it's an in-depth kind of analysis. You're not just summarizing it, you're analyzing this text. But like I said, there's two parts or two layers here. So why are you analyzing this thing? You're analyzing a specific text as sort of an example to help you make a general argument about a concept, a phenomenon, or a trend. What do I mean by a concept, a phenomenon, or a trend? So a larger idea, something going on in our culture that's important. How does a certain text or movie speak to that? I'll give you some examples. All of the essays we read from the critical reading unit address technology's influence on society. So technology's influence on society would be an example of a concept, phenomenon, or trend. And a lot of those analyzed primary texts and were, or artifacts. I'll talk about a primary text in a minute, sorry. A lot of those were artifacts. Google, they analyzed Google. Stupid games, they analyzed stupid games. They analyzed cell phones. Those would all be examples of artifacts. And they pretty much all made arguments about concepts, trends, or phenomenons. So these phenomena. So these articles we read in the critical reading unit, most of them are examples of what I'm asking you to do here. And a lot of them were published as web articles. We're actually, later on in this lecture, we're going to look at the web article version rather than the print version you had in your textbook of just one more game to illustrate this. Another example might be the movie Black Panther, which is a popular movie. I love Marvel, so I've seen it. Probably a lot of you have seen it, though. It did very well at the box office. But the rhetorical choice of Marvel to choose one of their black characters, an African character, and make a movie about that character at this time could be a kind of a response or a way of responding to addressing the Black Lives Matter movement and the different things happening in our culture right now with race. And so you're looking for a connection between a piece of pop culture, a movie, a show, whatever it is, a piece of pop culture that you're interested in, that you care about, a text that you like. You can pick anything for this. So you're looking at the relationship, the connection between that piece of text and something happening in our culture right now that's relevant. How do violent films speak to the mass shootings happening in our culture? You know, that's a very tragic one, but another phenomenon that comes to mind, a trend that comes to mind. So there's lots of choices here, and the field is pretty wide open. You can pick almost anything you want. If you have any questions about what you're choosing, email me, run it by me. Hopefully that kind of clears up what I'm asking you to do in this first sentence here. On one level, you have the text. On the other level, you have the cultural trend. How does it speak to that? What does it say about it? That's your argument, your claim that will be in your thesis. Here's another sentence from the task part of the prompt. The purpose of your essay is to explain why this artifact matters to our understanding of life in the digital age. You don't necessarily have to address a theme that's digital. You don't have to address technology like you did in the first unit. But you're writing a web article about a piece of media, so you're kind of working within the digital age. And it certainly can be an argument about technology if you want it to be. But you're explaining why this essay matters. Why this text matters. Why does Black Panther matter during the time of the Black Lives Matter movement? What does it have to say about race that's important? You're answering that question in your thesis. The next section of the prompt is the purpose. So hopefully it's clear what I've asked you to do. Now I'm going to tell you why I'm asking you to do that. One of the statements I have there is academic writing often involves producing written analyses of primary texts in a given area of study using specific analytical frameworks or lenses in order to make broader arguments about the topic under investigation. So you're essentially entering into an academic conversation. If you choose to write about the movie Black Panther, you will be entering into a conversation with people who have already written essays and articles on Black Panther. And this is something you'll have to do all throughout your academic career. And in the formula that's used in academia is analyzing a specific example, like a movie, to make an argument about a larger cultural issue, to kind of illustrate what you're saying about that issue or topic. So exactly what I said on the first slide. Learning how to do that kind of work as you go in and throughout college will be helpful. For instance, it goes beyond just the humanities in just classes like this English one. In statistics class, you might be asked to analyze a set of statistics and make an important argument about those. In a science class, you'll conduct an experiment and you'll have to make an argument about the results of that. So this, same with sociology, psychology, those kinds of things, you'll be making an important argument about a topic in the field of psychology, and you'll have to do a study or something and analyze that to prove your point. So this model is useful not just in the humanities, and that's why we're practicing it. That's why we're doing it in terms of purpose. One key phrase here is a framework or lens, which is basically a way into studying something. A lens provides a method, a way to analyze a text, a way to study something. So you need a method to study or analyze something. The framework or lens provides that. So, if you're studying something, like in those examples I gave, say in statistics, the framework or the lens would be math, or in biology, the framework or lens would be science, and psychology or sociology, the framework or lens would be those sociological, psychological discourses. So what you're probably wondering is, how do I choose a lens in this class? And a lens is exactly what it sounds like. The word framework refers to the idea of a method. This is kind of the bare bones of what you're doing, the formula into which you're plugging your analysis. And the word lens is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way of looking at the thing you're studying, in this case, the text you're studying. So this is the humanities. It doesn't necessarily have a lens or framework that automatically comes to mind the way, say, math or science or psychology might. So what are some examples? Here are some examples of lenses. I know this is kind of small text. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. What it comes down to is on the prompt on Canvas, I have a link to a website called the Purdue Owl. And the Purdue Owl is obviously a site put out by the University of Purdue, but it provides lots of resources for writing. And it's a good place to go. Whenever you have a question about writing, Google it, and the Purdue Owl will probably be the first thing that comes up. But these are lenses or frameworks, methods that were used to study texts, or that have been and still are being used to study texts throughout the history of academia. You can see the years present there when these things were used, or they all go to the present, so they're all still being used to some degree. For a long time, they are used to study literature, and that's kind of how the Purdue Owl sets it up. But now they're being used to study pop culture, all kinds of things, any kind of text. So you can use any of these. And if you go to that link that's on Canvas, you'll see all these listed out, and you can click on them to learn more about them. And the thing I like about this website is the summary of each one is just like 1 to 2 pages. It's very short. So you can learn a lot about this lens or this method in a very short amount of time. To give you some examples, Marxist criticism looks at class struggles and the differences between class and how economics plays a role there. Feminist criticism looks at the role of women. Critical race theory looks at the role of race. Some more recent ones are gender and queer studies. So that looks at the LGBTQ community and how gender is portrayed in literature or media. Critical disability studies, similar, looks at what's going on with folks who have disabilities and how they're represented in the media. Post-colonial criticism looks at the relationship between formerly colonized countries and the countries who colonized them, and what life is like after colonization, which decolonization happened in the mid-20th century, and there are lots of countries that used to be ruled by the British Empires. Many make an argument that the U.S. is an empire and has colonial-type relationships with countries. Psychoanalytical criticism looks at what's going on in the characters or the authors or the audience's minds. Deconstruction looks at binaries and how things that seem like opposites actually have things in common. New historicism and cultural studies looks at the relationship between culture and the media, which is exactly what we're doing in this project. You could say this project, no matter which of these lenses you choose, is to a certain extent a new historicist or cultural studies study, but you could still use that as your lens. You could pick a specific, historical event and talk about that. And you don't necessarily have to use one of these lenses. Don't worry about picking the lens first. First, pick the text you want to analyze and pick the trend, concept, or phenomenon you're going to study. And then you can kind of worry about the lens. And you may not even need to. If you feel like you have a good way of talking about that relationship, you don't have to spend any time or a lot of time on the lens. The lens is helpful and that's all it's meant to be. If you are really interested in studying a certain work but you don't know how to study it, you can come look at the lenses to help you figure it out, is the idea. The next part of the prompt is the steps to success, so some things you need to include in your essay. So obviously you need to pick the primary text, the lens to study it. We just talked about that. Second is you're also going to have to do research. So I use the word primary source to describe the text. That's the song, the movie, the music video, the poster, whatever it is you're analyzing. The secondary sources are the research. So we haven't really talked about this yet. I'm asking that you find 3 sources beyond the primary text, 3 secondary sources to kind of help you flesh out your argument. This will be really similar to what you did on the previous essay when you wrote the synthesis section. You basically find 3 sources and have your own synthesis section here before you get into the bulk of your analysis. Now you're writing on popular culture, and we'll talk more about this in the next lesson and the one after that. But I'm not going to require that you find scholarly sources or even use the EW library, although the library can be a great resource, and we'll talk about that in the next lecture. I'm going to ask that you find 3 credible sources, which puts some of the weight of the responsibility on you. You have to evaluate and decide, should I use this source in my paper or not? And we have a test for that called the CRAP test. Those letters each stand for a quality a good source, a credible source should have. Currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So if it meets all those requirements, it passes the CRAP test. It's kind of a funny memory trick because you want the source to be crap. If it meets these 5 requirements, it's credible. So it's kind of a joke. You want it to be crap. But that's what you'll be doing 2 lessons from now. In lesson 8, you'll be evaluating sources using the CRAP test, deciding which sources to use in your paper. So we'll talk more about this in lesson 7 and lesson 8. But you need to have 3 secondary sources you cite in your paper that pass the CRAP test, and those are in addition to the primary source, the text you're analyzing. And the final product must take the form of an online article. So it's not just a Word document. You'll publish this online. In lesson 9 is going to be about publishing, which is an important lesson that I haven't included in past versions of the class. But I like the idea of publishing this. I think it will help you be more invested in the assignment. And so I'm actually going to create a WordPress site. Eastern has access to WordPress, and we'll publish your articles on WordPress. You'll also turn in a Word document version that all grade, and your peers will review in all grade. At the end of week 9, and then at the end of week 10, you'll turn in the final draft, just like you did for the essay you just turned in. But in addition to that, you'll also publish it to WordPress. In addition to that, in lesson 9, when we're talking about audience, you'll pick a place where hypothetically you could publish it. So an online journal. In the discussion board post for this week, I have some examples of online journals. BuzzFeed, Vulture. I also have conservative and liberal journals on there, the Huffington Post and the National Review. So you can look through those for some examples of web articles and see kind of what a web article is like. And then in lesson 9, in a few weeks, I'm going to ask you to pick one of those. You don't actually have to submit it to them, but you are supposed to write your essay as if you were submitting it to them, so that you are choosing an audience, basically. And we'll talk more about that over the next few lessons, but have that in your mind. And the main takeaway from this is it's digital content. It means you can include pictures, you can include video. Instead of citing your sources, you'll have hyperlinks that the reader will click on to go directly to that source, which is the purpose of citations and works cited, is to show your reader how to find the sources you're citing. So in a web article, you just cut out the middleman by putting the hyperlink directly in there. This is a new thing. We haven't always had students write web articles. This is a new development in English 101, but I think it's a very important one. It's part of the purpose of this is to learn how to write in the digital age. People aren't writing things the way they used to. They're writing in a digital age. And so now we have emails and text messages and social media posts, and the kind of the academic version of that is the web article or the online article. And so this is still a very academic paper, but it's bridging the gap between the kind of traditional academic paper and the newfangled way of doing things by having you write a very academic thing, but doing it in an online format where you actually publish it online. So instead of just writing, another grading criterion from the rubric is visual design. It needs to look aesthetically pleasing. And I know that may sound challenging to some of you, but it's fairly minimal how much of you that you have to do, and I'm going to provide lots of resources in the meantime to help you with that, so don't worry too much about that. Right now, focus on choosing your text and choosing your trend phenomenon it speaks to, but kind of have in the back of your head that this will eventually be, a visual text published in a digital medium. So I wanted to give you kind of an example thesis to illustrate this before we look at examples of whole articles. So here's just one example of a potential thesis. To give you an idea, you don't need to do this thesis. It's not necessarily the greatest thesis, but hopefully it'll kind of get you started thinking about it. The depiction of Diana Prince in Wonder Woman reflects that women now have more opportunities than they once did through better gender equality and more diverse roles in media. So the text I'm analyzing here would be the 2017 movie Wonder Woman. The concept, trend, or phenomenon is the changing roles of women. The framework or lens would be feminism. So the idea here is I'm using a feminist lens to look at Wonder Woman, and I'm arguing that things are changing in society in a positive way for women with better gender equality, and this is reflected in Wonder Woman because you have the heroic lead of the film as a female rather than a male. The kind of role that Wonder Woman has is one that in the past has been traditionally male characters, and so whereas women have been relegated to kind of negative roles in the past in media or stereotyped. And so here you get to have a heroic female character, and that reflects the positive changes that are going on in society for women. So this is just one example. You could disagree. You could argue that the depiction in Wonder Woman is negative, because in some ways it is. It's sort of one note. You could also argue that things are not great in society for women. They've certainly gotten better, and at least in the U.S., than they were before, but there's still great disparity when it comes to gender equality. So you could argue this the completely opposite way. You could also write on an entirely different subject. All I'm trying to do here is show you the relationship between a primary text, a trend or phenomenon, and the lens used to analyze the text to help you figure out what you want to write about. And we're going to look at two more robust examples that have actually been published here. The first of those is just one more game. And we're looking at this because we used it in the critical reading unit, but it was originally published as a web article. In fact, this image, so if you click on the link I have for you on Canvas, you don't have to read this entire article because it's very long, and you read an abbreviated version of it in our textbook earlier in the quarter. But if you just look at it and skim it, you'll see how it's a web article. It has this picture running along the side of it the whole time with all these famous video game characters. And it also has an actual video game one can play at the top of it. So the author, Sam Anderson, really used the digital space. He has an article about video games, and on the digital page he lets you play the video game. And that's something you could do, type of thing you could do in your own article, since you'll be publishing it to WordPress rather than just doing it in a Word document. You'll still turn in a Word document for me to grade, but you wouldn't be able to put a video game at the top of a Word document. You can put images and hyperlinks in Word documents, though, so that'll help me with the grading. All right, so basic question I'm asking here is how does the web, sorry for the typo, how does the web version address the prompt for our assignment? And how, in other ways, how is Anderson's article very much like what I'm asking you to do in our assignment? And this is the same question I ask you in the discussion board post, but I ask you to find your own web article. So go pick an article and write about it. I have 6 examples of places where web articles are published there, including both liberal and conservative ones, as well as a number of pop culture ones that really have articles like the things you'll be writing. So pick one and answer these same questions, but I'm going to answer the questions I'm asking you to answer in your discussion board post right now about Anderson's article, since it was originally a web article. So his argument, he doesn't really have a thesis because he covers both sides. I would prefer you have more of a thesis where you clearly pick a side in yours. But a clear argument he makes at one point is about the negative effects of stupid games. And he says, I worry about the dystopic potential of gamification. Instead of just bombarding us with jingles, corporations will be able to inject their messages directly into our minds with ads disguised as games. So he's saying the problem with stupid games is that companies can use them to take advantage of us. And so his primary text he's analyzing is stupid games in general. He has a couple specific ones, such as Tetris and Angry Birds. And this is important because you can analyze more than one text. I think I have text with the S in parentheses on the prompt. So you don't have to just analyze one thing. You can analyze several if you want. His concept, trend, or phenomenon is the proliferation of stupid games. It's really about how stupid games have become ubiquitous and they're all over in our culture. You could also argue that the trend or phenomenon is gamification here. And his framework or lens is Marxism. He's saying, in a capitalist society, companies could take advantage of us by designing games where they profit from us. If any of you have played games on your smartphone, I play games on my smartphone, you've probably seen this. There are ads in them. There's usually ways to do better in the game by spending money. I myself play Madden Mobile because I love football, and I've never spent any money on it, but I'm constantly tempted to because I could get such an advantage if I did. And so you can see his point here. And so it's kind of an anti-capitalist stance because he's saying this is a bad thing. But you can write a pro-capitalist stance if you want. I think capitalism is great in a lot of ways. So you certainly don't have to take like an anti-capitalist stance if you're writing from a Marxist perspective using that lens. What you would be doing, though, is talking about the relationships between classes and economics and other things that figure into that topic, that kind of topic, the way Anderson does here. But you don't have to have the same view as him. Just want you to know that you can take whatever argument you want as long as it's a reasonable argument and you support it well. if you have any questions about that, run it by me. We'll talk about kind of problematic arguments in the coming weeks. So a little bit more here. I wanted to have a slide specifically devoted to visual design, since this is a web article. So he's got a couple of great things. He's got images, the image from the slide just a couple ago that runs along the side of his article, and also an actual game you can play. Those are great. A weakness is he doesn't have hyperlinks. Even when he cites other people, he doesn't have links to those pieces of writing, and it would be great if he did. All right, I wanted to find an example we haven't read in class. So, like I said, I have examples of a few places where you can find web articles. Vulture is a great source. Their mission statement is Vulture consuming pop culture. So it's a great place to find examples of analysis of pop culture, since you're writing an analysis of pop culture. But one of the most recent ones was on the movie Halloween, which is well timed with this time of year. And in this, I'm sorry, I should have fixed this slide so that the bullet points would come up one at a time. I missed that. I apologize. So please bear with me and try to pay attention here. So how does this one address the prompt? Here's her thesis. Both texts focus on mental illness and inherited trauma, as well as mothers so consumed with worry about their children's safety that they wind up separated or estranged from them. So the two texts she's analyzing that she references here are Halloween and The Haunting of Hill House, which I haven't seen. I haven't seen either of these, but I believe it's a Netflix show. And so the concept, trend, or phenomenon she's analyzing is parents' fears for their children, which is obviously a very important issue. She also has some important things here, mental illness and inherited trauma. So these are very important things. And she's talking about how a movie that we wouldn't necessarily see immediately as a really deep movie, Halloween, addresses these very important things and speaks to them. And she's making an argument here that parents become so concerned with their children's safety that they actually kind of drive them away with their overprotectiveness. So she's making a very important argument about choices, parenting choices people make in our culture, and showing how this, arguing that, so that's the general argument, is parents can actually, if they're too overprotective, they can push their children away. And she's saying the new Halloween movie that just came out depicts this. And so the framework or lens here is psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis has to do with the psychology of the characters, and it often talks about parent-child relationships. And I think this is a good illustration of how the lens can be helpful, but you don't necessarily have to have it. If you were looking at the Halloween movie, you really wanted to write about that, and you were trying to figure out what to write about it, and you ask me, I might say psychoanalysis, because horror movies often focus on psychology. But if you just looked at the movie and kind of came up with this argument on your own about what it says about parent-child relationships and protectiveness, you wouldn't necessarily need the lens if you came up with that on your own. So the lenses are meant to help you, but you don't absolutely have to have them. Look at the text, think about what you want to say about the trends from our culture and what it says about them, and go from there and use the lens if you need it. The lenses are there if you need them. Good example of that here. Elements of visual design. Again, I must have been going too quickly. Sorry about the bullet points, but this has a good use of hyperlinks. For instance, when it says that The Haunting of Hill House is about inherited trauma, you click on that, you see another article that talks about that. Weaknesses here is it only uses one image. It has an image, which is great, and it shows the mother and child, so that's effective, but it's just at the top of the page, whereas the image from the Anderson article was visible the whole time you scrolled through it. So you want to have visuals or audio or videos or games or something throughout. So you don't need to constantly bombard the reader, but more than once. And you want to have hyperlinks so that they can find your sources. And so I think I picked two articles. I tried to do a good job of showing what it's like when you have one of those things but not the other. The images as well as the hyperlinks. So Hopefully you have a really good idea of what a web article is now, as well as a cultural artifact, and how you want to talk about that in your paper, how you can use a cultural artifact to make an important argument, about an important issue, how you could use a movie like Halloween to make an argument about parents' overprotectiveness is one example. So there's those two elements to it, a pop culture thing, a movie, a show, whatever, as well as a topic you're interested in, and an argument about the relationship between those two that really gives your paper an important point. That Halloween paper, that Halloween article has an important point there. And so you can use pop culture, you can use the text or text you analyze to help you make that important point. And that's all we're really doing here. There's a lot of language on the prompt, but when you break it down to the simplest form, using a pop culture text or text to help you illustrate an important point you want to make about our culture or society. That's all it is. So on the discussion board this week, I ask you to pick an article, not one of the two I just went over. Pick your own article, but analyze it the way I just did these two. How does it meet or address the requirements for the prompt? And then I also ask you to pick your text, pick your concept, trend, or phenomenon, and also pick your lens or framework. If you're not able to answer the lens or framework one at this point, that's fine. But you want to start thinking about what you're going to want to write about, because next week you're going to have to start doing research, and this is a complex assignment. So it's not something you want to start planning at the last minute. You want to start planning it now, and we'll be doing things each week to work on it throughout the rest of the quarter. So it's a fun topic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the creative kinds of things you can come up with. Enjoy.